Welcome to the Caregiver Toolbox Dementia series. Today's program is As the Brain Deteriorates, What Stays and What Goes. My name is Lynn Dobb, and I'm a licensed independent social worker here at the Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging. And with me is...
My name is Paula Tolliver. I'm also a social worker here at the Area Agency on Aging. Lynn and I work together. And today what we'd like to do is give you a little bit of an overview as the brain deteriorates, what goes. Because one of the things that we've noticed is that when people are talking about dementia or many of the causes of dementia, the largest one is Alzheimer's disease, they only focus on short-term memory or on memory loss. And in fact, the whole brain is deteriorating. And so we'd like to kind of give an idea of what kind of is happening in terms of as the brain deteriorates. It's also important to understand what stays or what deteriorates at the very end. And so sometimes we can use these kind of ideas about what stays to help interact with people more successfully. And then we'd like to give you some day-to-day suggestions.
Dementia, the term dementia, as Paula introduced, a lot of times people associate dementia equals Alzheimer's disease equals memory loss. And what we want to stress is that it's more than that. Dementia is brain failure. The person's brain is dying. And depending on what part of the brain is impacted, you will observe different symptoms in the person that you're caring for. So what goes? Dementia can involve changes in many different things. One of the things that people automatically think of is the short-term memory. They can't remember, that they took a shower or that they didn't take a shower that morning, or that somebody came to visit just an hour ago. They tend to, get lost in space and place. And so they may think that they are living in a different time. They may think that that you are not their spouse, but that you're their brother or their mother, because they're losing that ability to be in that present. And they're drawing on those old memories to help keep themselves grounded at that moment. And the hard part for loved ones is, wanting to ultimately correct people, and say, no, I'm not your brother, I'm your spouse. As hard as it is, we encourage people to try and just go with the flow, because it's not anything that purposeful that someone's doing. It's just literally they are time traveling. They're getting lost in place and space. The other thing that we often see, and this sometimes can be what families pick up pretty early on, is that difficulty with numbers, with math, with money, the checkbook. I know nowadays not many people balance their checkbooks, but I know in my family, my older relatives still want to balance their checkbooks down to the penny. And one of the early signs that things were going amiss was that inability to be able to maintain the checkbook, to be able to understand the role of numbers, the role that math played in managing their finances and their checkbook.
So some of the other symptoms that you may see, first of all, there is a decrease. The brain doesn't really is not as aware of some of the signals that it's always been aware of. For example, hunger, thirst. People oftentimes forget that they've already eaten and they'll eat again. They're not getting those hunger signs, or they just don't eat because they're not getting those acute hunger pains. The brain's just not picking that up. It is really common for people with dementia to start to have incontinence issues, particularly with bladder. And so sometimes people are, having to use incontinence products and things like that. The sleep wake cycle, people, we talk about, families will ask me, is sundowners a real thing? And I say, well, it is really common for people to kind of their bodies to not to be up at night and sleeping a little bit more during the day. And this can be really challenging. The brain gets very tired near the end of the day oftentimes, and so people tend to be more agitated when they're tired. People also could be more scared when they're tired because the shadows, they misinterpret the shadows. Hot and cold awareness, people oftentimes are cold, but they can't necessarily tell you they're cold, and so they get agitated, or they pace, or they wander. And some kinds of pain. And so what I wanted to say about pain is, in the old days, we used to think that people who have dementia don't experience pain in the same way. And we now know that people do experience pain. They just can't tell you where it is oftentimes. So people, especially in the arm and the leg pain, they can be moaning and groaning, or they can, and not really be able to tell you what hurts. And so people do experience pain. They just aren't sometimes able to tell you. At the same time this is happening, though, as the brain is deteriorating, there's this what we call hypersensitivity. And that means that the nerve endings in these parts of the body are actually more sensitive and more, they're what we say hypersensitive. And so they may have more pain or more distress, or they're more sensitive. And these four parts of the body are the mouth and the throat. So people become super sensitive to hot and cold drinks. And people they may also be on medication that's causing them to have dry mouth. And so now their mouth is super dry, and people doing a lot of this. Sometimes people may be spitting without realizing what they're doing, the hygiene part of it. So the mouth and throat becomes super, super sensitive. The palms of the hands oftentimes become super sensitive. And one of the things that's helpful about this is to calm someone down. An easy way to help someone get calm or to get grounded is actually just to hold their hand, because a little pressure on the palm of the hand can calm someone, because you have this hypersensitivity also in the hands, also in the feet. And so, again, a stranger wouldn't do this, but a family member, just to kind of stroke or rub someone's feet or put lotion into people's feet, can also be super calming, because there's this hypersensitivity in the feet. And then the genital areas, and this is a problem, because if we're assisting people who are becoming incontinent, or we're assisting people to shower, we have to be super, super careful, because people have this hypersensitivity in that area and can be startled or can be in great distress when we really don't mean to hurt them. We don't mean to cause them to be like that. And we don't always realize this hypersensitivity happens there. Some other changes, again, that we may or may not recognize. One of the changes that I really, really wish that I learned many, many years ago. I was in nursing school in 1977, and they did not teach us this because they did not know it. But so the vision changes. And so for most people at age 75, most people just don't have a lot of side vision left. That's a very typical change. That doesn't mean there's dementia, but what can happen with dementia is the vision becomes more and more tunneled. Okay, so what that means is, if you're at home and you want to try this, do this and see what happens. What happens is you don't see on the side, you don't see above you, and you really don't see much below you. And so if your shirt is dirty, you don't actually see it. And so if you're walking straight ahead and you're walking and your vision is like this, you may not see the throw rug on the floor, so you may trip and fall. Sometimes people, when their vision is like this, they look down at their plate and they only see the food on this side of their plate. And I say this because families oftentimes don't realize that this is happening. And so they might come up behind a person and touch someone, or come up on the side of someone and touch them, or start to talk to them. And this can be truly scary for the person because they don't see it. And so a good rule of thumb is to always be in front of people. Always be in front of people. Don't start touching people. Don't start, don't start any activity unless you're right in front of people. Another very challenging issue is that the taste buds with dementia um, typically just decrease quite a bit. Now, the taste buds with old age, as you age, tend to decrease in general, but with dementia, that's a little bit more acute. And so what we've discovered is that people tend to crave the one taste bud that doesn't really decrease much, which is sweet. And so it's really common for people who have any form of dementia to crave sweets and to love sugar and to just kind of crave sweets. And I always say, look for foods that are cold, cool, because of that hypersensitivity in the mouth. People like cool food or cold food, and sweet. And whatever you can do to make things cold and sweet, oftentimes it's going to be more attractive to people. Also, what is very common is as dementia moves, especially Alzheimer's disease and some of these other diseases move across the brain, they get to kind of the middle of the brain, and it is very common for people to experience what we call hallucinations and delusions. Hallucinations is seeing, hearing, tasting, sensing something that's not there. Delusions is believing something that's happening that isn't. For example, thinking someone's coming in and stealing your money, or thinking that someone's coming in and opening all the windows in the middle of the night, and when in reality, you might actually be doing it, but then you forget that you've done it. Or looking at the shadows outside, which is a hallucination, and thinking that it's people dancing, thinking that people are dancing in your backyard. So it's really, really common for people who have any form of dementia to experience hallucinations and delusions. And again, we want to argue with people, we want to reason with people, and in reality, neither one of these work, because to the person, it's completely real. It may not be completely real to us, but it's completely real to them. And it's very distressing sometimes if people don't, people will get very distressed if no one believes what they're saying. So this is where we sometimes say, just kind of, I usually say, get on the train and go where it's going, which is just kind of this idea that, when people have delusions and hallucinations, it's really okay not to argue with them or try and correct them all the time. Really see if they're scared, find a way to make them be less scared. And then as the front part of the brain gets destroyed, people can become emotionally very different. And so they can fly off the handle, they can have what we call catastrophic reactions, which means they just, lose the sense of proportion to whatever happened. People can also just not have a lot of emotional feeling at all, whereas before they might have been upset by a death of a close person or whatever. Now it may seem like, don't they care? No, it's that front of the part of the brain starts to die, and so people experience a lot of this different emotions than they've experienced throughout their lives.
So what else can change when somebody presents with dementia? One of the big things is safety awareness, being cued into what is safe and what is not. That may be going off with a stranger that just engages them in a conversation and not realizing that they don't necessarily know the person, or approaching a stove, a hot stove, and not being aware that it is hot and what would happen if they actually put their hand on it, or even things other, kitchen utensils, using a sharp knife, the need to be cautious in terms of how they handle a knife or how they may pass on a knife to somebody else. Those are things that they may lose that ability to clue into and need a little bit more oversight. Then we think in terms of appropriate social behavior. One of the things that we see and we often are shocked at is that somebody with dementia will come out with curse words that we didn't even know that they knew. It may be a string of them, it may be just interjected. They may say things that you just would not expect the person that you know to use those words. They also may, their volume of their voice may be significantly louder or more boisterous than you might have expected. The other issue that we are sometimes seeing is changes in things like touching, maybe touching somebody's necklace or touching somebody's hair when it may or may not be appropriate. And then physically getting closer to somebody, not being sensitive to physical space. And that we all know that there are some people that don't do that. And they don't have dementia, but with somebody with dementia, we often can see that use of respecting safe space may get lost. Other things that we may see that change include just the use of language, understanding and using words and concepts. So this may be something like, we're going to go outside after we have lunch. And they just that the complexity of that sentence or description really just doesn't register. They may pick up on going outside and not have remembered you said after lunch, and all of a sudden be getting up and getting their coat and heading outside. Or you may ask them to pass you something and they pick up a napkin instead of a salt shaker. Not being able to be able to hold on to what items, the labels for different items, common items that they might have known at other times. The other thing that we find is that it's often difficult for them to really process, problem solve, think through what will happen if I do this, making judgments a little bit more fraught, and sometimes making decisions that just don't make sense. It may be, this could, result in, wanting to go outside in cold weather without shoes and not necessarily realizing, oh, there's snow outside, I should have shoes on. Or, in reverse, it's 90 degrees and pulling out, an extra sweater and overcoat and not being able to recognize that it's not necessarily appropriate for the season. The challenge is that the individual themselves, they may not even be aware that there's anything wrong with what they're doing. They don't see that. They're really operating, in a way in which it makes sense to them. But that sense is distorted as a result of the damage to the brain. So it's a combination of this language and decision-making, judgments, and just even being aware that can result in family, looking sometimes askance and wondering, why are they doing that? And it's not really that there's an answer to that why. It's the way their brain is operating.
So Lynn and I have been talking about what do we see as the brain deteriorates? What are some common symptoms? Now, and I think it's important to really look at that whole scale, not just memory, but also what also can happen. But it's also important to think about what tends to remain intact as the brain deteriorates. And because we can use those skills that stay intact to help interact with people more successfully. In general, with most of these disease processes, the right side of the brain stays pretty good. And so what is basically, and the inside of the brain, deep inside the brain stays pretty good, at least till very late in these disease processes. So one thing that stays pretty that really remains is what we call automatic social responses. And it's kind of that little chit chat. People can oftentimes still do chit chat. Hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Oh, it's good today. How are you? So kind of that chit chat. In fact, this can become a little challenging because families, someone who's living with someone may experience a lot of changes, but the person goes out and all of a sudden they can still do chit chat and everybody around says, well, they seem fine to me, even family members. And it's because people can still use chit chat. And that's why we recommend thinking about some of those automatic social responses to help engage a person. Like, for example, in our culture, it's very appropriate to use a handshake to greet someone from the front. And so really use that as a way to help assist someone down the road. Also, long-term memories. Remember, Lynn already talked about the fact that people will what we call time travel. Their short-term memories are gone from the left frontal temporal part of their brain. And so people will go back into their brain and they'll use those long-term memories to interpret the world. People do not become children. People do not have a second childhood. This is a complete misconception. People do take those long-term memories, though, and use them to interpret the world. But if you think that they're experiencing a second childhood and treat them like a child, it won't go well because they remember they're not a child. So it's important to understand that even though people may be using those long-term memories, that they are not a child, there's not a second childhood. However, the skills that we learned very early in life tend to stay pretty well. So I'll give you an example. People, once they have a toothbrush in their hand, can oftentimes brush their teeth, okay? Because that's a skill that most of us learned very early. Also holding on to silverware and then eating with silverware. Those are very early kind of skills that we learn. But people may, if I say go brush your teeth, they may not actually know where the bathroom is. And if they get there, they may not even know where to find their toothbrush. So they may lose a lot of the, kind of getting up to that point, but they may be able to do those early skills. And the same goes for dressing. People may not be able to go to their closet and pick out the correct clothes, but if the clothes are there on the bed, sometimes people can put them on. Okay, so it kind of depends on what those earliest skills were, and we can use those early skills to kind of help people still do some of their day-to-day activities. People oftentimes remember they're adults and they remember they want to be in control. And so as much as we can allow people to continue to feel like they're in control, we're going to be better off. When people feel like everyone's treating them like children and everybody's taking away all their control, well, that's when people start to get really agitated. So remembering that people still want to be in control as much as possible is important, and giving people choices at some, in some level is important too. And then, music and rhythm is stored on the right side of the brain. And so we've just recently been doing a lot of research about music and rhythm. And what we've discovered is music for most people with dementia is magic. And so it's actually probably as effective as a lot of our medications is to put music on. In fact, for those of us who are caring for an individual with dementia, music is also magic because music overall helps the brain to relax, and it's a full brain experience. So it kind of helps the brain to connect itself a little bit. So for people with dementia, one of the things I always say is think about what music they enjoyed in their 20s and 30s and try and get that into their life, at least an hour, sometimes 2 hours a day. This is particularly true when people are agitated. We talk about sundowning. The best time is late in the afternoon. I remember I went to someone's house at one point and the wife answered the door and there was this music playing in the background. And before she talked to me, she had to take her earplugs out because she put on every afternoon Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, because that's really what helped her husband be calm in the afternoon. But she got tired of it at a certain point and put in put in the earbuds. Okay, we just wanted to kind of mention, as you think through people's people's symptoms and how you're reacting to them, to know that symptoms do change. And so one of the challenging issues with the brain deterioration is you finally get something that works, and 6 months later, the person's condition has deteriorated a little bit more, and that doesn't work so well anymore. But also thinking about really what you cannot control, okay? You can't really control the person and who they've been, their personality, their preferences, their history. Now you can learn about those and use those, but you can't change those. You can't really control the level and type of dementia. Again, you can learn about those and educate yourself. And then obviously other medical conditions the person may have, sensory status, what their vision and their hearing is like. A lot of times we can correct or treat those, but we can't necessarily change those. So what can we change? Well, oftentimes just looking at the environment and calming the environment down can make a world of difference to a person with dementia. So think about setting, is it a familiar setting? Is it warm enough for the person? Thinking about the sounds, is there a lot of background noise? Is there things that are irritating to the person? What are people seeing? If people are seeing car keys and they're not supposed to drive anymore, but they still have, the car, maybe it's a good idea to get rid of that, so thinking about what people see and what they hear, how the whole day fits together. Again, most people with dementia are going to do well with predictable patterns. They're not going to do well with things that are not familiar or predictable. And so if you can, I'm not saying that there aren't things that happen during the day that aren't familiar or predictable, but if you can keep the day as predictable as possible. Now, how the helper helps, how you approach people, the way you respond to people's words and actions, how you react. Again, people are always going to do better with someone who responds and approaches them from the front, who responds with a very calm manner. In fact, even if they're upset, the best thing you can always do is put a smile on your face and smile back. Because if you get upset, the person's going to tend to get more upset. And so kind of thinking about your own responses and trying to find a way to respond to them in a way that keeps them calm and keeps them functioning the best they possibly can.
So some other suggestions for interacting with an individual who has dementia, like any relationship we have, anybody that we know, it's really important to think in terms of connecting with that individual and prior to just moving into a task. For example, if you happen to be the person that has to bathe somebody, instead of focusing right from the start on, we have to get a bath in, we got to go do this, we have to shower, in terms of that rapport that you have with somebody, use that to your advantage. Let's, what do you think? Why don't we go into the bathroom, you and I? It's warmer in there. I've turned on the shower and I'm making it nice and cozy. Try and you might still be dealing with the task, but you're relating to the person. You're trying to set them at ease and give them reason to feel more comfortable with what's the interaction is and what's being asked of them. Getting to know somebody's history, if you're not, a family caregiver and you're working in a facility or in home care, you're going in and you're meeting this person as they present present day with the disease process of dementia. but they were a person with a whole life story before they got this diagnosis. And I think that that sometimes can get lost. I've had families, whose loved one might have had to do a short-term stay or a long-term stay in a facility, and they actually write up a little bit of story about who their loved one was. What kind of work did they do? They worked at Nationwide. They're, a father of 3 children. They have 5 grandchildren, kind of learning about who they are. They love to sail. Books were their favorite thing. Letting them having a sense of who this person is. They love to watch birds. So that may be something that you can incorporate in your interaction with them. Like many of us, we like to be able to know what's going to happen next. We're not, all big on surprises. So building routine, building certain patterns so that we're removing the chance of a major surprise. There's some predictability for yourself and for the individual that you're working with. Building that routine can make somebody much more at ease. We know that after we have breakfast together, we walk to the bathroom, and that's where we begin the process of brushing our teeth. That's just part of the pattern. And if we stay with that, that can help people feel more comfortable. Talking with, loved ones to learn more about the individual, or if you are the loved one, thinking in terms of, what did this person like and what did they like? And how can you build on that? How can you take advantage of it? Because we are creatures of habit. And sometimes, by bringing up, old familiar stories or tasks, you can be setting somebody at ease. So this is probably, I know in social work, it's social work 101, and it probably is in a lot of any kind of communication class that you might ever take. But to be aware that our facial expressions, our body language, our head motions, everything we do communicates to another individual. If we stand there with our arms crossed or we're pointing our finger, we're communicating, even if we use no words. So as Paula mentioned a little while ago, she said, if nothing else, put a smile on your face. It's to be able to let somebody know this is a friendly person. This is not something I need to be afraid of. And, to think in terms of, if you're standing above somebody, perhaps getting eye to eye so that they can see you. Because again, remember the changes in their vision, monocular vision, they may not be able to see above, and you're standing above them and all they're seeing is right into your chest. That can be very intimidating. So recognize that how you hold yourself will make a big difference. And there is what we call mirror neurons. We tend to match the visual cues that we receive from somebody else. And so recognize that the way in which you hold yourself, your tone of voice, the way your hands move, not only the tone, but the volume of your voice can make a difference. So, be aware that those visual cues are really critical, because the words may be hard for somebody with dementia to comprehend, but they can understand or take in the visual message that you are sending. Other things to just be aware of in terms of what we are categorizing as vocal cues. Um, you know, as Paula mentioned a little earlier, people are not experiencing a second childhood, and using that parental voice can trigger a reaction that you don't want. So as much as is possible, be conscious of that. It's kind of like, I told you to X, Y, and Z. That I told you to, I can still hear my mother saying it. And I know that that's not something that I should start a sentence with when I'm talking with somebody that has dementia, even if I've told them many times, or asked them to do something, to be conscious that it's, again, how I make my ask is as important as what I'm asking. A lot of times people will, you know, with good intentions, um, tend to talk to people with dementia in almost like a childlike behavior, a high, pitch, or, oh, hi, sweetie, how are you? And all of that can just trigger a negative reaction. To just be aware that you're talking to a person using your normal language and tone of voice from one adult to another.
So another one of our suggestions is to pay attention to sequencing. And this is kind of a fancy word we use, which just means the order of tasks. The fact is that people with dementia, what happens is they lose chunks of the order of tasks. So someone, maybe if they learned to eat or to brush their teeth when they were very young, once they have a silverware in their hand or a toothbrush in their hand, they know what to do with it, okay? They forget where the kitchen is. They forget where the bathroom is. They forget how to turn on the water. They forget, so people forget parts of the sequence, okay? And within any sequence, there are what we call hidden assumptions. We just assume that people know how to turn on the water. We just assume that people know how to pull out the chair to sit down at the table, okay? And so sometimes what happens with people who have dementia is they may see the food sitting at the table, but they may stand by the table and never sit down because they don't remember how to pull out the chair. They see the food, they may reach over and try and eat it, or so they may see those visual cues. So one of the things that we can do, and one of the things we suggest, is to really watch and see what parts of sequences are still available to people and maybe start them there. For example, sometimes people can't choose clothes out of their closet anymore. They just get confused and lost, or they take everything out. But sometimes if the clothes are sitting out on people's bed and they see the clothes, at a certain point, they can go ahead and put them on. As dementia progresses, now maybe they can't put them on correctly, but if you start the sweater with them, they can finish putting the sweater on. Or if you help, so people oftentimes can only do parts of sequences, okay? They don't kind of have the whole sequence. The same goes for doing something like fixing a whole meal. People oftentimes can't go from beginning to end. They can't choose the food, but they can still cut the lettuce, or they can still clean something. They can still do parts of a sequence, and by letting them do the parts of the sequence, they still feel involved. They continue to feel involved in the family. They're not just sitting and watching, which is not, for a lot of people, a really comfortable activity. So, and sometimes if you want someone to do something, you can model the behavior and they will also do it, right? So you can do it and they can do this and they can do it. And show them what you're doing. Sometimes if you want someone to do something, instead of telling them, you can show them. Now we wanted to show you two different techniques, which are very, very helpful and really should be used really in general when you're working with someone who has dementia. And the first one is called positive physical approach. It's the way of approaching someone so that you don't startle them or scare them. If you need to assist them when dressing, for example, just kind of think about your approach. So one of the first, and it's number one here, is always come from the front. One of the things that happens, as we mentioned earlier, is people don't have the side vision. They don't even have, they have very tunneled vision. And so coming from the back or from the side, we're kind of used to doing that with people who don't have dementia or with our family members, but this is not helpful for someone with dementia. It is scary. It can be frightening. People can hit back like this, and then we blame them. We say they're getting angry and they're hitting and they're getting assertive, but really they're getting scared. So as much as possible, come from the front and go slow. If you can match people's eye level, it's best. So if they're standing, be standing. If they're sitting, as much as possible, or if they're laying in bed, as much as possible, get down to their eye level, because leaning over someone, what happens is we don't realize sometimes their lack of vision, now they're just seeing our chest. They're not seeing our face because we're leaning over them. So as much as possible, if you can get to people's eye level, use their name and make sure they know yours. And you say, well, I've been married to someone for 60 years. What do you mean I need to introduce myself? I'm not saying, you need to be formal about introducing yourself, but sometimes people, you're a familiar person, but they don't know your name anymore. They struggle with that, or they may call you by someone else's name. So it's really okay to say, hey, Dad, it's Paula. Hi, how you doing? Hi, good morning. So be friendly, but also get in the habit of kind of making sure that the person knows you're there, that you're friendly, and use their name. Pause. And when we say public space, we really are talking about, I usually say, think about how your hand goes out, and if their hand goes out, that's about 3 feet. It's about the edge of what we call public space. I would pause there and kind of gauge their reaction, see how they're doing. One of the mistakes that we make is we go in and start trying to assist people quickly, and our hands come out of nowhere for them. And all of a sudden they get scared and startled. So I always say pause. And really the best thing to do is to offer your hand as a handshake. Hey, how you doing this morning? How are you feeling? Are you good? We're going to go in the car. We're going to go to the doctor. Let's say the person's standing and you're greeting them, but you need to get their coat on first. Again, offer your hand in a handshake, just kind of say hi. This is a social greeting that is very culturally appropriate for our culture, and most people can still do a handshake. And a handshake basically means a friend, someone who's, they're comfortable with. Wait for permission. And I'm not saying that they're going to say, yes, come closer to me, but if you start to move closer and they let you, then we would take it as permission. So wait kind of for that permission to get closer. And then before you start assisting someone, the best thing to do is get to the person's dominant side. For most people, this is their right side. But for left-handed people, they are always going to do better if someone who's assisting them is on their left side. Okay. So for most people, it's going to be the right side. But as much as possible, if you want to assist someone in dressing, assist someone in showering, assist someone in toileting, assist someone in getting dressed, in eating and drinking, you're always going to be better off on the person's dominant side. Okay, so as much as possible, you want to be on the person's dominant side. You want to be, and then we wanted to show you hand under hand position. So as you come forward, you offer your hand to the person's dominant hand and you move to that side. So what you're doing, if you look at the picture, is you're sliding your hand around so that the thumbs are kind of encircling each other and the person's hand is on top of yours. We call this hand under hand assistance, okay? Hand under hand assistance. And we wanted to show you a little video that illustrates this, keeping in mind that this video was made for transportation drivers. It's not really for families, so they do call the person passenger, but we think that it actually shows you in a pretty clear way how to use hand under hand assistance and positive approach. So we're going to show you this.
Positive physical approach and hand under hand assistance. We will demonstrate the correct way to approach a passenger to either offer assistance or give instructions. Remember that it is never appropriate to approach or touch a passenger outside of their visual range. A person's visual range decreases with age and disability level. Therefore, avoid approaching a person from either the back or the side. First, let us demonstrate positive physical approach. Approach from the front and match the person's eye level if possible. Try to avoid leaning over a person who is sitting. Go slow. Use deliberate movements. Pause at the edge of personal space, which is about 2 feet from the person. Smile and offer your hand in a handshake greeting. Use the person's name and make sure they know what your name is. If possible, point to your name tag, which should be worn just below your neck area. Wait for a response, a nod, or a smile from the person. This may serve as permission to move in closer to either give the person instructions or assist them in an activity. Next, let us demonstrate hand-under-hand assistance. From the front handshake position, move towards the person's dominant side. Without letting go of their hand, pivot your thumbs around to slide your hand under their hand. Realize that you have just moved into the person's blind spot and you can squeeze their hand slightly to get their attention before giving instructions. You may use your opposite hand to hold the person's opposite hand and guide them through movement. You may also place your opposite hand on the person's shoulder to maintain a calming presence while assisting with activities like fastening a seatbelt.
So this is called hand under hand assistance. Again, I apologize that they kept calling the person a passenger, but we just wanted you to see the technique. And it is a very helpful technique, really, to assist people in practically any activity. You can, kind of hold their palm, and that can be calming. You can kind of use this stance to gauge people's response to touch. You can use this stance, to establish those safe boundaries people aren't necessarily hitting when you're holding them in this safe position. And you can use it to guide their hand and arm movement. Now, the picture that was shown there also shows you holding the other hand, but you don't always have to hold the other hand. Sometimes your hand can be on their other shoulder, and so it's not always, kind of walking with the person.
So to begin to bring this program to close, we want to just share with you once again what assistance is available for family caregivers. There is the National Family Caregiver Support Program that is nationally funded and operated by all area agencies on aging, sometimes referred to as AAAs. Under this program, there are a wide range of caregiver workshops and resource guides. The workshops similar to what you've been listening to today. The Family Caregiver Support Program funds services designed to assist caregivers on a short-term basis. It is not ongoing funding available, but it is short-term, and it is available to help caregivers that have a need that can be addressed through this program. Services include, under the National Family Caregiver Support Program, are information and assistance, counseling, respite, which is getting a break, and other supplemental services dependent on the individual caregiver's needs. We work hand in hand with our county partner agencies. The Area Agency on Aging here in Columbus serves Franklin County and the surrounding counties listed in front of you: Delaware, Fairfield, Fayette, Franklin, Licking, Madison, Pickaway, and Union. And in each county, there is what we call a focal entity. It may be the senior center, it may be the Commission on Aging. Every county is a little bit different, but they are a partner with the area agency to bring services and supports to individuals and family caregivers.
The Area Agency on Aging also through this program puts out a number of different guides, and these are available on our website. You can download the PDF version and use them on your computer or make copies for yourself, but we will also send you a hard copy of any of these guides if you are interested. Just let us know. So first of all, there's a resource guide, the older adult resource guide, which is kind of like a big phone book for older adults. It covers all 8 of our counties. That's up there in the corner. There's also a caregiver toolbox, which we've produced, which is kind of like a how-to guide. And it has a chapter on dementia. It has chapters on Medicare and Medicaid and how to hire in-home help. And so it's kind of like a how-to guide. We also have a bunch of smaller topical guides for people who only want certain kinds of information. So for example, we have a guide on long-term care and hospice care, which has the list of all the facilities, assisted living, nursing facilities, hospices. We also have a hiring guide for in-home care, which kind of tells you how to hire. We have a transportation guide if you only need transportation. So these are kind of all the smaller guides that we have.
Thank you for joining us today. Please know that if you have questions, we welcome your reaching out to us. You can call 614-645-7250 or go to our website at www.coaaa.org. On our website, you will find the guides that Paula just referenced, as well as handouts that go along with this program that we just provided for you. We are here for you should you have any questions or just want to talk through your individual caregiving situation. Thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.